He told his mail-order bride, "The room is yours," but the secret behind it nearly broke her heart. The first kindness Rose Merritt received in nearly a year was so simple that it almost shattered her. It was not a promise of love. It was not a warm embrace. It was not even a smile. It was a quiet sentence spoken by a stranger at the edge of a wind-beaten ranch yard, while the evening sky burned orange over the Colorado hills, and the stagecoach driver hurried to turn his horses back toward town. "I made a room ready for you," the rancher said. "It is yours." Rose stood with one gloved hand wrapped around the handle of her old traveling case. Dust clung to the hem of her brown dress. Her shoulders ached from the long ride out of Milton Creek, and her heart had spent the last 20 miles preparing itself for disappointment. She had expected many things from the man who had answered her letter. A hard look. A cold arrangement. A few rules spoken before she had even stepped over the threshold. She had prepared herself to be told where to stand, what to cook, when to speak, and what not to expect. A woman who came as a mail-order bride did not arrive with much power in the world. Rose knew that better than most. But she had not prepared herself for a room. A room of her own. A place where she could close a door and breathe, without owing anyone a smile for the privilege. The rancher stood a few feet away, holding a lantern in one large hand. His name was Matthew Boone. He was taller than she had imagined from his careful letters, broad across the shoulders, with a weathered face and eyes that seemed to notice too much while asking for nothing. His hat was pulled low against the evening wind. There was mud dried along one side of his coat, and a scar near his left brow that looked old enough to no longer hurt, but deep enough to never be forgotten. He did not step closer when she failed to answer. He did not ask if she was pleased. He did not make her gratitude part of the bargain. He only turned slightly toward the house and said, "You can wash up inside. Supper is plain, but it is hot." That was when Rose nearly broke. Not because the words were grand. Because they were not. For 11 months, every kindness given to her had carried a hook hidden inside it. A meal at Mrs. Pritchard's boarding house meant an extra hour scrubbing floors after dark. A borrowed shawl meant a reminder in front of strangers that Rose had come down in the world. Even the church women who had helped her find Matthew's notice had done so with gentle voices that made her feel less rescued than pitied. She had learned to hear the price before it was spoken. But Matthew Boone's voice held no price. Rose looked down quickly, afraid her face would betray her. The cold wind moved across the yard, lifting the loose strands of hair at her cheek. Somewhere near the barn, a horse stamped and shook its bridle. The lantern flame trembled in Matthew's hand. "You all right, Miss Merritt?" he asked. Miss Merritt. Not wife. Not woman. Not obligation. Just her name, given room to stand by itself. Rose pressed her lips together and nodded once. "Yes, sir, just tired from the road." Matthew watched her for a moment, not with suspicion, but with the still patience of a man who had seen animals bolt when reached for too fast. Then he bent, picked up her smaller satchel before she could stop him, and carried it toward the porch. "You do not have to call me sir," he said over his shoulder. Rose followed him because there was nowhere else to go. The house rose before her in the fading light, larger than she expected but not proud. It sat low against the land, with a wraparound porch, clean windows, and a roof that had been patched with care. A cottonwood tree stood to one side, bare branches scratching softly at the evening sky. Beside the steps hung a wind chime made from old horseshoes, and the sound it made was not pretty exactly, but it was gentle. Rose noticed these small things because fear had made her careful. A careless place told the truth about careless people. This place was not careless. Inside, the air smelled of coffee, wood smoke, and fresh bread. The kitchen lamp was already lit. 2 plates sat on the table. Not one, not a plate left aside. 2 plates placed across from each other with folded cloth napkins and a small jar of plum preserves between them. Rose stopped just inside the doorway. For a moment she saw another table. A narrower table in a back kitchen in Abilene, where she had eaten standing up because Mrs. Pritchard said boarders came first. A table where people discussed her future while she washed their cups. A table where her name was spoken as if she were a problem to be solved before winter. She blinked the memory away. Matthew set her satchel near the staircase. "Your room is upstairs, first door to the right. I put fresh water in the pitcher. There is a bolt on the inside of the door." Rose looked at him then. He had said it plainly, like it was nothing. But it was not nothing. A bolt on the inside meant he had thought about fear, not his own, hers. He must have seen the question in her face, because his jaw tightened slightly, as if he regretted revealing too much kindness too soon. "A person rests better when they know a door will stay shut," he said. Rose could not speak. The lantern light cut soft lines across his face. He looked away first, not embarrassed exactly, but uncomfortable with being seen in the act of caring. "I will be out checking the north pen," he said. "Take your time." Then he stepped back out into the yard, leaving her alone in the warm kitchen with 2 plates waiting, and her heart aching in a way she had not allowed it to ache for months. Rose stood there until the sound of his boots faded. Only then did she let her hand rise to her chest, where her mother's small silver thimble hung on a ribbon beneath her dress. It was the last thing she owned that had belonged to family. She held it through the fabric and closed her eyes. "Do not trust too quickly," she whispered to herself. But the house was quiet. The room upstairs was waiting. And outside, the man she had agreed to marry was giving her the one gift she had stopped hoping for. Space to choose what came next. Rose climbed the stairs slowly. Each step gave a soft creak beneath her boots. At the top, she found the first door on the right and opened it with one trembling hand. The room was small but clean. A quilt lay folded at the foot of the bed. A blue curtain moved gently at the open window. On the washstand sat a pitcher, a basin, and a sprig of dried lavender tied with twine. There was no dust on the chair, no man's coat hanging on the peg, no sign that she had been placed where she did not belong. It looked as if the room had been waiting for her. Rose set her traveling case down beside the bed. For the first time since the schoolhouse closed, since the boarding house, since the whispered pity and the hungry winter and the letter she had mailed with shaking hands, she sat on a bed that had been made for her and did not know what to do with the safety of it. Downstairs, the kitchen door opened and closed. Matthew had come back in. Rose wiped quickly at her eyes, though no tears had fallen. "Not yet." She stood, smoothed her dress, and reached for the door. Before her hand touched the latch, she noticed something half hidden beneath the edge of the quilt. A folded paper. Old, yellowed, and tucked there as if someone had placed it in haste and forgotten it. Rose stared at it. Then, with the house silent around her and the wind moving softly through the curtain, she reached down and picked it up. On the outside, written in faded ink, were 4 words. "For the woman after me." Rose did not open the folded paper right away. She stood in the little upstairs room with the paper held between both hands, feeling the thinness of it, the old softness where it had been folded and unfolded before. The words on the outside seemed to rise from the page like a warning. "For the woman after me." The woman after whom? Rose knew the answer before she let herself think it. Matthew Boone had been a widower. His letter had said as much in one careful line. "My wife passed 4 winters ago." The words had been plain, respectful, and short. He had not explained the wound beyond that, and Rose had not asked. A woman answering a mail-order notice had no right to press her fingers into a stranger's grief. But now grief had left a note beneath her quilt. The room felt suddenly less like a gift, and more like a place where another woman's shadow still stood. Rose looked toward the door. Downstairs she could hear Matthew moving in the kitchen. A chair scraped lightly. The stove door opened and closed. He was giving her time just as he said he would. She should have put the paper back. She knew that. But fear has a way of making a person search for danger before danger arrives. Rose had lived too long in places where every soft word hit a sharp edge. If there was a truth in this room that could hurt her later, she wanted to meet it now while her traveling dress was still on and her heart was not yet foolish. She unfolded the paper. The ink had faded brown. The handwriting was neat but uneven, as though written by a hand that had grown tired before the words were finished. To the woman who comes after me. If you are reading this, then Matthew has given you the East Room. Rose stopped breathing. The East Room. The room he had called hers. She read on. He will not tell you what it means. He will think silence is kinder. He will think leaving space around pain is the same as tenderness. He is a good man, but he has always mistaken quiet for mercy. Rose sat slowly on the edge of the bed. Outside, the last light slipped behind the hills. The room deepened from gold to blue. She could still make out the words, but barely. She reached for the small lamp on the bedside table and lit it with fingers that did not feel steady. The flame caught, and the woman's words returned. This room was mine once, not because I was his wife, but because I was afraid when I came here too. I had nowhere to go, and he gave me a door that could close. I married him later, after I learned that kindness does not have to ask for witnesses. Rose pressed one hand to her mouth. The paper trembled. She did not know this dead woman, and yet the words had found the hidden place inside her with painful accuracy. A room, a door, fear, kindness that did not show itself off. Had Matthew done this before? Had he opened this same room to another frightened woman, another person with nowhere to go, and said very little because very little was all he knew how to offer? Rose should have felt comfort. Instead, something cold moved through her chest. Not jealousy. She was too honest to name it that. She had no claim on Matthew Boone. She had barely shared a supper with him. It was something sharper and sadder. A feeling that she had stepped into a life already shaped by someone else's hands. The quilt, the lavender, the blue curtain, the bolt on the door. Had they been chosen for her, or had they been left behind by the woman before her? Was Rose being welcomed, or placed carefully into an empty space no one had truly cleared? She read the rest. If Matthew has brought you here because you are in need, do not mistake his silence for indifference. He will notice when your shoes are worn, but he will not say so. He will fix the loose board before you trip, but he will not ask for thanks. He will leave food near you when hunger embarrasses you. He will stand outside a room rather than enter it without being called. Rose's eyes burned. She remembered the bolt on the door. She remembered the 2 plates. She remembered the way he had not watched her too closely when she almost broke in the yard. At the bottom of the page, the handwriting became weaker. But make him speak. Make him tell you what place you hold in this house. Do not let his goodness become another kind of loneliness. A woman can be treated gently and still be left unsure whether she is wanted or only sheltered. Rose lowered the letter to her lap. The words settled around her with the heaviness of truth. Wanted or only sheltered? Had that not been the question already standing between her and every warm thing in this house? She had come to the Barrow Creek Ranch because Matthew Boone had answered her honest letter. She had told him she was 26, trained as a teacher, able to cook plainly, keep accounts, sew, read ledgers, tend a garden, and manage children if there were any. She had also told him she owned little more than one traveling case, 2 dresses, and her mother's thimble. She had not made herself prettier on paper. She had not written soft, false lines about longing for a good husband and a peaceful hearth. Those may have been true in some secret corner of her, but need had stood closer than longing. Winter was coming. Mrs. Pritchard's boarding house was growing colder, and the widow who ran it had begun dropping hints about a cousin with a store in Kansas who needed a woman behind the counter and did not much care if she wished to go. Matthew's reply had been plain. Miss Merritt, I do not require pretty promises. I require honesty, steadiness, and someone who will not panic at a hard season. If you still wish to come, I will meet the stage on Friday. No talk of romance. No flattering lies. That had been why Rose trusted the letter enough to come. Now, sitting in a dead woman's room, she wondered whether plainness could hide as much as sweetness. A knock sounded at the door. Rose folded the letter so quickly the paper nearly tore. Miss Merritt, Matthew's voice came through the wood. Supper is ready when you are. Rose looked at the letter in her lap. Her heart beat hard enough to make her throat ache. She could ask him. Right now. She could open the door, hold up the paper, and ask why a letter from his dead wife had been waiting beneath her quilt. But the thought of speaking such a thing on her first night in his house felt too cruel. To him, to the woman who wrote it, to herself. So she slipped the letter beneath the pillow, smoothed the quilt as best she could, and opened the door. Matthew stood in the hall with his hat in his hand. He had removed his coat. His work shirt was clean but faded at the cuffs, and there was a small burn mark near one sleeve. He looked at her face for only a second before his gaze moved respectfully aside. You found the room all right? He asked. Yes, Rose said. Her voice sounded calm. She was proud of that. He nodded. If the window lets in too much cold, I can set a strip along the frame tomorrow. It is fine. Another silence. Not empty, not unfriendly. But now, because of the letter, Rose could feel all the words he was not saying. Matthew shifted the hat in his hands. I know this is a strange way to begin. Rose looked up at him. There was something in his face then that had not been visible in the yard. Not hardness, not regret exactly. A man standing before a locked door inside himself and not knowing where he had put the key. Yes, she said softly, it is. He accepted the answer, as if he deserved no gentler one. I do not expect you to pretend otherwise, he said. Then he turned and went downstairs. Rose followed him, carrying a secret that was not hers and a fear that was. At supper, the food was as he had promised. Plain, but hot. Beans with salt pork, cornbread, coffee, and the plum preserves sitting between them like something that had been placed there for courage. Matthew did not ask her many questions. He asked if the stage ride had been rough. He asked if she had eaten at noon. He asked whether she preferred coffee in the morning or tea if there was any left in the tin. Small questions. Safe questions. Rose answered them carefully. When he bowed his head before eating, she bowed hers too. His prayer was only 2 sentences. He thanked the Lord for the food and asked blessing on the new life under this roof. Rose felt those words strike somewhere deep. New life. Not wife. Not arrangement. Not even marriage. The new life under this roof. She looked at his hands folded beside his plate. The knuckles were rough, scarred, and clean. On his left hand, no ring. Of course, there was no ring. And still, she imagined one had been there once. After supper, she rose to clear the plates, but Matthew stood at the same time. You do not have to earn your meal tonight, he said. Rose froze with one plate in her hand. The words were not sharp, but they cut because they landed so close to the truth. Matthew seemed to realize it. His face tightened. "I only meant you are tired," he said. Rose set the plate down. "I know what you meant." But she did not. Not fully. That was the trouble with kindness after hardship. It arrived wearing the same coat as pity, and a wounded heart could not always tell them apart. Later, when the house was quiet and Matthew had gone to the back room, Rose returned upstairs. She bolted the door, then stood with her fingers resting on the metal slide. The sound of it locking should have comforted her. Instead, it made her wonder who had first needed that comfort badly enough for Matthew to put it there. She took the letter from beneath the pillow and read the final line again. A woman can be treated gently and still be left unsure whether she is wanted or only sheltered. Rose folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer beside the bed. Then she lay awake long after the lamp was out, listening to the wind move across Barrow Creek Ranch, and wondering whether Matthew Boone had given her a room because he wanted her to stay, or because he had once failed to say those words to someone else. Just before sleep finally took her, she heard a soft sound outside her door. A board creaked in the hall. Then came Matthew's voice, so low she was not sure he meant her to hear it. "Forgive me, Anna," he whispered. Rose opened her eyes in the dark. Anna. The woman before her had a name. And whatever truth had brought Rose into that room, Matthew Boone was still speaking to a ghost. Morning came pale and cold over Barrow Creek Ranch, but Rose Merritt had already been awake for an hour. She lay still beneath the quilt, watching weak sunlight gather at the edge of the blue curtain, and listened to the house waking around her. A board sighed below. The stove door opened. A kettle touched iron with a soft ring. Somewhere outside, Matthew spoke to a horse in a voice so quiet and steady that Rose could not make out the words. He sounded different outside. Less guarded. As if the animals received the part of him that people did not. Rose turned her head toward the small drawer beside the bed. Anna Boone's letter was inside. She had not slept well after hearing Matthew whisper that name in the hallway. It had followed her into dreams and back out again, soft as smoke, heavy as stone. "Forgive me, Anna." What had he done that needed forgiveness? Had he brought Rose into this house too soon? Had he placed her in Anna's room because he could not bear to leave it empty? Had he mistaken need for healing, as lonely people sometimes did? Rose hated that her mind kept building unkind stories around a man who had been nothing but gentle. Yet fear did not ask permission before it worked. It simply entered every quiet space and filled it with questions. She washed her face in the cold water from the pitcher, pinned her dark hair low at the back of her neck, and put on the cleaner of her 2 dresses. It was gray wool, plain and slightly worn at the cuffs. Mrs. Pritchard had once said the color made Rose look like a rainy day. Rose had worn it anyway because it did not show stains. Before leaving the room, she opened the drawer one more time. The letter rested there, folded neat. Rose did not touch it. Downstairs, Matthew stood at the stove turning a pan of fried potatoes. He glanced up when she entered, and something like relief crossed his face before he hid it behind practical motion. "Coffee is ready," he said. "Thank you. There is cream if you take it." "I do." He reached for a small pitcher and set it beside her cup before she had to ask. That small act struck her harder than it should have. At Mrs. Pritchard's, cream had belonged to paying guests. Rose had poured it for others for 8 months and taken her own coffee black, not because she liked it that way, but because she had learned which comforts were not meant for her. Matthew put a plate before her and sat down across the table. For a few minutes, they ate in a quiet that almost felt peaceful. Almost. Then Rose noticed the 3rd chair at the table. It stood near the wall, tucked slightly away with a folded shawl hanging over the back. The shawl was faded blue, not dusty, not forgotten, clean, brushed, and kept. Rose looked away too quickly. Matthew saw. His hand stilled beside his coffee cup. For one uneasy breath, neither of them spoke. "That was Anna S.," he said at last. Rose looked at him, surprised that he had chosen to say it. "I can move it," he added. "No," Rose said too fast, then softened her voice. "You do not have to move it on my account." Matthew nodded once, but his eyes held a weariness that made him look older than he had the night before. "She liked that chair by the morning light," he said. "Said it was the only place in the house where mending felt less like punishment." It was not much of a memory, but it was enough to make the room feel fuller. Rose pictured Anna there, sewing by the window, perhaps smiling at her own complaint, perhaps looking across this same table at a quieter, younger Matthew Boone who still wore a ring. The picture hurt. Rose did not understand why. She had not come to Barrow Creek expecting a love story. She had come because survival had narrowed her road until only one bridge remained. She had answered a notice from a widowed rancher because winter was close and dignity did not keep a woman warm. Yet sitting in that kitchen, looking at the shawl of a dead wife, she felt the first sting of wanting something she had not given herself permission to want. A place that was not borrowed from another woman's memory. After breakfast, Matthew took his coat from the peg. "I need to ride the south line," he said. "There is a loose gate near the creek. You are welcome to rest today or look around the house, whatever suits you." Rose almost said she would clean. The answer rose in her from habit. Then she stopped. "You do not have to earn your meal tonight." His words from supper returned, not as a wound now, but as a test. "I would like to learn the place," she said, "if I am to be useful here." Matthew looked at her carefully. Useful is not the same as welcome. Rose lowered her eyes to her coffee cup. "No," she said, "but sometimes it is the only road a person knows." The room went quiet after that. Matthew put his hat on slowly. "Then we will find you another road." He left before she could answer. Rose stood alone in the kitchen, hearing that sentence after he was gone. "We will find you another road." Not you should. Not you must. We. The word was dangerous because it warmed her. That morning, Rose walked through the house with a dust cloth in her hand and tried not to feel like a thief among memories. The sitting room had 2 bookshelves, a braided rug, a stone hearth, and a mantel with 3 framed photographs. She stood before them longer than she meant to. One showed Matthew younger, clean-shaven, standing stiffly beside a fair-haired woman in a pale dress. Anna. Her face was gentle but not weak. There was a spark in her eyes that made Rose think she had laughed easily and argued plainly. The second photograph showed the ranch house from years before the porch had been widened. The third showed Matthew with a boy of perhaps 6 or 7, both holding fishing poles beside the creek. Rose leaned closer. The boy had Matthew's eyes. Her heart gave one hard beat. She had not known there had been a child. The letters had said widower. They had said no children in the house, but they had not said no child had ever lived. A sound came behind her. Rose turned. An older woman stood in the open front doorway holding a basket covered with a cloth. She had silver hair pinned sharply back, a square jaw, and the kind of eyes that could weigh a person before greeting them. "You must be Rose Merritt," the woman said. Rose straightened. "Yes, ma'am." "I am Martha Keene. I own the next place west, though folks around here act as if Matthew owns every fence between here and the creek." Her tone was dry, but not unfriendly. Rose stepped forward to take the basket. "Please come in." Martha handed it over and glanced around the room, her eyes stopping briefly on the photographs. Something changed in her face, then vanished. "Brought bread," she said. Figured a woman arriving from a stagecoach supper could use something that did not taste of dust. That is kind of you. Kindness depends what a person does after the bread is gone. Rose blinked. Martha looked at her directly. You will hear things in town. I have heard things before. I expect you have. But Caldwell Springs has a special talent for making old sorrow sound like fresh scandal. Rose held the basket tighter. Caldwell Springs must have been the nearest town. Matthew had mentioned a mercantile there in his letter, but nothing more. Martha stepped closer to the mantel and touched the edge of the photograph with the boy. That was Daniel, she said quietly. Rose waited. Matthew's son. The word seemed to pull all the air from the room. Son. Rose looked again at the small face in the photograph, a gap-toothed smile, one hand wrapped around a fishing pole too tall for him, boots muddy to the ankle. What happened? Rose asked before she could stop herself. Martha's gaze did not leave the picture. Fever took Anna first. Daniel followed 2 weeks later, same winter, same house. Rose felt the basket grow heavy in her arms. She thought of the bolt on the door, the folded shawl, the room upstairs, the whispered name in the hallway, "Forgive me, Anna." The house was not holding one ghost. It was holding two. Martha turned back to her. Matthew does not speak of it much. Men like him think grief becomes safer if they put it to work from sunup to dark. Rose's voice came softly. And does it? No, Martha's mouth tightened. It only grows calluses. Outside, a gust of wind moved through the cottonwood branches, making them scratch against the side of the house. Martha's eyes searched Rose's face. He is a decent man, she said, but decency does not always know how to be a husband. Do not let him hide behind chores when words are needed. Rose thought of Anna's letter in the upstairs drawer. Make him speak. The same warning, now from a living woman. Martha took one step toward the door, then paused. There is another thing, she said. Rose's fingers tightened around the basket handle. Some folks will wonder why you came. Some will wonder what you were running from. And one man in particular will try to turn your past into something he can sell. Who? Rose asked. Harlan Pike. The name meant nothing to Rose, but the way Martha spoke it made it feel like a shadow crossing the floor. He owns the triple ash spread east of here, Martha said. He wanted this creek line for years. Anna would not let Matthew sell. After she died, Harlan thought grief might make him easier to move. It did not. Rose looked toward the window, where the yard lay bright and cold beyond the glass. What does that have to do with me? Martha's answer came slowly. A lonely rancher is hard to move. A rancher with a new bride people can whisper about is easier to corner. Rose felt the meaning settle in her stomach. She was not only entering Matthew's house. She was entering a fight she had not known existed. Martha opened the door, then looked back once more. If Matthew brought you here, he must see something steady in you. Hold to that when Caldwell starts talking. After she left, Rose stood in the sitting room with the bread basket in her hands and the photograph of Daniel Boone watching from the mantel. For a long moment, the house felt too quiet. Then Rose heard hooves in the yard. Matthew had returned sooner than expected. She went to the window and saw him riding in from the south line, his coat dark against the pale morning. Beside him rode another man on a black horse. The stranger was broad, well-dressed for the country, with a gray hat and a smile Rose could see even from the house. Matthew did not smile back. Rose knew, before either man reached the porch, that this must be Harlan Pike. And when the stranger lifted his eyes to the window and tipped his hat directly at her, Rose felt the first cold touch of the trouble Martha Keene had warned her about. Harlan Pike entered Barrow Creek Ranch as if he had once owned it, and had only been waiting for everyone else to remember. He swung down from his black horse with smooth confidence, brushed dust from the sleeve of his dark coat, and looked over the yard with a smile that did not warm his face. Matthew dismounted beside him but did not move toward the porch. He stood with one hand on the reins, his shoulders still, his jaw set. Rose watched from the sitting room window, one hand resting against the curtain. She had met men like Harlan before. Not his exact kind, perhaps, but close enough. Men who entered rooms already measuring which weakness could be pressed. Men who smiled before they asked a question, so you would feel rude for hearing the question correctly. Harlan turned his head toward the house again. This time, Rose did not step back. She let him see her watching. His smile grew a little. Matthew noticed. His eyes moved to the window for the briefest moment, then back to Harlan. "You said it was urgent," Matthew said. His voice carried through the cold morning air, low but clear. Harlan rested one gloved hand on his saddle horn. "Land matters usually are, Boone." "Then speak plainly." Harlan laughed softly, as if Matthew had made a joke between old friends. "Still hard as fence wire. Marriage has not softened you yet then." Rose felt her face tighten. "Marriage?" The word sounded different in Harlan Pike's mouth, less sacred, more like a card laid on a table. Matthew did not answer. Harlan glanced toward the house. "I thought I might pay my respects to the new Mrs. Boone while I was here. She is resting from the road. She looked wide awake to me." Matthew stepped slightly between Harlan and the porch. It was not a large movement, but it changed the air in the yard. "She is not part of this business." "Everything under a man's roof becomes part of his business eventually," Harlan said. "You know that." Rose's fingers tightened on the curtain. Matthew's horse shifted beside him, sensing something in its master's stillness. "What do you want?" Matthew asked. Harlan reached into his coat and took out a folded paper. He did not hand it over at once. He let it rest in his fingers, visible and unexplained. "I have made a fair offer on the East Creek acres twice now," he said. "You refused both times. The land is not for sale." That is a proud sentence, costly one too. Matthew held his gaze. "I can afford it." "Can you?" Harlan tilted his head. "Winter feed is high, cattle prices are soft, you are short 2 hands since the Miller boys left, and now you have taken on a wife." Rose heard it then. Not a statement. A hook. Matthew heard it too. A muscle moved in his cheek. "My household accounts are not yours to read." "Not yet." Harlan's smile stayed in place. "But debts have a way of making private matters public." Matthew took one step forward. "Say what you came to say." Harlan finally held out the paper. Matthew did not take it right away. Rose should have stayed inside. She knew that. A new bride did not walk out into men's land talk on her first morning unless invited. But something in Harlan's tone pulled at an old wound inside her, the one left by months of being discussed while standing close enough to hear. She was tired of being made small by distance. She opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. Both men turned. The cold struck her cheeks at once. She had not put on her shawl. The wind moved through her pinned hair and lifted the edge of her gray dress, but she kept her hands folded in front of her and walked to the top step. Matthew's face changed, not anger, concern. "Rose," he said quietly. It was the first time he had called her by her Christian name. The sound of it settled in her chest before she could stop it. Harlan removed his hat with a flourish that belonged more to a theater than a ranch yard. "Mrs. Boone," he said, "Harlan Pike, your neighbor to the east." Rose looked at him. "Good morning. I hope Matthew has made you comfortable." "He has." "How generous of him." Harlan's eyes moved toward the upstairs window, then back to her face. A woman needs comfort when she comes so far from everything she knows. Rose heard the pressure beneath the courtesy. Matthew shifted. Pike. No offense meant. Harlan raised one hand, only welcoming a newcomer. Rose descended one step, then welcome me plainly. For the first time, Harlan's smile faltered. Matthew looked at her, surprised. Rose felt her heart pounding beneath her dress, but her voice stayed steady. I have found that plain words save time. Harlan studied her then, as if he had expected a frightened woman and found something less convenient. Well, he said, smile returning more slowly. Plainly, I have brought your husband a matter of business that may affect the future comfort of this house. My husband can read it then. She had not meant to say my husband with such firmness. Matthew went very still beside the horses. Harlan heard it too. His gaze flicked between them. Of course, he said, and held the paper toward Matthew. A notice from the county office. Boundary review next month. Since the creek line has been disputed before, I have petitioned for a formal survey. Matthew took the paper now. Rose watched his face as he read. The first line hardened him. The second pulled something darker from his eyes. This was settled 5 years ago, he said. 5 years is a long while, Harlan replied. Records are misplaced. Men die. Widows misremember. Lines drawn in grief are not always lines drawn in law. Rose saw Matthew's hand tighten around the paper. Anna. This was about Anna too. Harlan put his hat back on. No need for bitterness. Let the county decide. Unless, of course, you would rather accept my offer before the matter becomes less comfortable. Matthew folded the paper once carefully. Get off my land. Harlan gave a soft sigh, almost pitying. That temper will not help you in Caldwell Springs. It is helping me now. For one dangerous moment, no one moved. Then Harlan smiled at Rose. I look forward to seeing you in town, Mrs. Boone. Folks will be eager to meet the woman Matthew finally brought into Anna's house. The words landed like a slap no hand had delivered. Anna's house. Not Matthew's. Not theirs. Anna's. Harlan mounted his black horse and turned toward the east road. Dust rose beneath the animal's hooves as he rode off, leaving the yard colder than before. Rose stood on the step, her hands numb. Matthew kept his eyes on the road until Harlan disappeared beyond the cottonwoods. Then he turned to her. I am sorry you heard that. Rose looked at the folded notice in his hand. Was he lying? About the survey, no. About the house. Matthew's face closed. Rose regretted the question the moment she asked it, but she did not take it back. Matthew looked toward the porch, then the upstairs window, then back at her. Anna lived here, he said. That is all he meant. No, Rose said softly, it is not all he meant. The wind moved between them. Matthew looked tired suddenly, not from the morning's work, but from carrying years that had not stayed buried. He uses what people leave unguarded, Matthew said. And what have you left unguarded? His eyes came to hers. Rose had not meant the question to be cruel. She had meant it as truth, but truth spoken too soon can still wound. Matthew folded the notice again and tucked it into his coat. I need to ride to Caldwell, he said. Speak with the county clerk before Pike gets there with his version. I can go with you. No. The answer came too fast. Rose stepped back. Matthew saw it and softened, but not enough. It is better if you stay here. Better for whom? For you. Rose almost laughed, but there was no humor in her. I have spent almost a year hearing people decide what was better for me. Matthew removed his hat and rubbed one hand over his brow. Caldwell will talk. They will talk whether I am there or not. That is what I am trying to spare you from." Rose looked toward the road where Harlan had vanished. "Being spared is still being handled, Mr. Boone." The formal name struck him. She saw it. He lowered his hand. "I do not know how to do this right," he said. The confession was quiet and rough. For a moment, Rose's anger thinned. Matthew looked at the house behind her. "When Anna was sick, everyone told me to be strong. When Daniel followed her, they said it again. So I got strong in all the wrong places. I learned to keep things away from people because that was the only way I knew to keep anything standing." Rose swallowed. There he was again, near the door inside himself, touching the latch but not opening it. "Keeping things away can look very much like keeping people out," she said. Matthew took that in as if each word cost him. Before he could answer, a rider came hard up the west trail. Martha Keene. Her gray mare slowed near the porch, sides heaving. Martha's face was sharp with worry. "Matthew," she called, "Pike has already been to town." Matthew turned. "When?" "Yesterday evening, before he came here." Martha looked at Rose, then back to him. "He has been asking after your new bride, too." Rose felt the cold deepen. Matthew's voice dropped. "What kind of asking?" Martha hesitated. That hesitation told Rose enough. "What kind?" Rose asked. Martha's eyes softened, but only for a second. "He is saying the school where you worked did not close by accident. He is saying a woman does not answer a bride notice unless she is running from something." The world seemed to tilt beneath Rose's boots. The school. Abilene. The fire. The thing she had not yet told Matthew, because she had not known how to bring it into a house already crowded with ghosts. Matthew turned to her slowly. Rose saw the question in his face, not accusation, but shock that there was another hidden wound between them. She took one step back, her hand closing around the porch rail. "It was not what he is making it sound like," she said. Her voice shook. Matthew looked at her as if he wanted to come closer, and was afraid she would retreat if he did. "Then tell me what it was," he said. Rose looked past him toward the hills, where Harlan Pike had disappeared with her name in his mouth and her past in his hands. For months she had survived by staying silent. Now silence had found a way to speak against her. And if she wanted to remain at Barrow Creek Ranch, she would have to tell Matthew Boone the truth she had hoped never to carry into his house. Rose Merritt had told herself many times that the past was safest when folded small. A person could carry it that way, press it flat, tuck it somewhere no stranger could reach, smile when people asked harmless questions, change the subject when they came too close, keep walking, keep working, keep breathing. But now her past had ridden ahead of her into Caldwell Springs on Harlan Pike's tongue. It had become a rumor before it had ever become a confession. Matthew stood in the ranch yard with the county notice in his coat and worry in his eyes. Martha Keene sat stiff-backed on her gray mare, watching the two of them with the hard kindness of a woman who knew when silence had stopped helping. Rose's fingers tightened around the porch rail until the old wood pressed lines into her palm. "The schoolhouse burned in March," she said. Her voice sounded small against the wide land. Matthew did not interrupt. Rose looked down at the dust on her boots. "I was the teacher." Martha's expression changed, but she said nothing. There were 23 children enrolled. Some came only when planting was done. Some came with their little brothers or sisters because there was nowhere else to leave them. It was a poor school, but it was mine. I kept the stove burning. I mended primers with flour paste. I taught boys who thought reading was foolish and girls who had been told numbers were not meant for them. She looked toward the cottonwood tree, where dry leaves moved in the wind. "I loved it." The words surprised her by how much they hurt. Matthew took one slow step closer, then stopped, giving her the choice of the distance between them. Rose went on. One afternoon, one of the older boys brought lamp oil into the storage room. He was not bad, only reckless. He wanted to scare another boy. I smelled smoke before I saw flame. I got the smaller children out first. Then I went back for 2 coats and the attendance book because I thought if I saved the book, maybe the board would know the school still had a shape. Her mouth tightened. That sounds foolish now. No, Matthew said quietly, it does not. Rose swallowed. The building was gone before sunset. No child was hurt, not one. But the school board said I should have controlled the older boys better. The boy's father said I was blaming his son to cover my own carelessness. And because no one had died, people had room to argue over who should carry the shame. A wagon wheel creaked somewhere in the distance. The sound faded. They closed the school instead of rebuilding it, sent the children to a bigger district 5 miles away. I lost my position. Then I lost my room. Then I lost every person who had once said they respected me, because respect grows thin when there is nothing left to gain from offering it. Matthew's face had gone pale beneath the weathering of sun and wind. Rose looked at him fully now. I did not burn the schoolhouse, Mr. Boone. I did not harm those children. I did not run because I was guilty. Her voice broke on the last word, and she hated that it did. I answered your notice because I was tired of being watched like guilt had a smell. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Matthew said, I believe you. Rose stared at him. No questions, no careful weighing, no request for names or proof, just the words plain as a hand laid gently over a wound. I believe you, he said again. Something inside Rose loosened so quickly it frightened her. She looked away before the feeling could become tears. Martha cleared her throat. Then Pike has less power than he thinks. Matthew turned toward her. Not if the town wants a story more than truth. Caldwell always wants a story, Martha said. But it also likes documents. If the county comes for a survey, they will look at the land records. If Pike is stirring talk about Rose, it is because he wants your attention split before that hearing. Matthew's eyes narrowed. He knows something is weak. Or he hopes you think it is. Rose wiped her palms against her skirt. The letter from the county mentioned old records. Could Anna's papers help? Matthew went still. Martha looked sharply at him. Rose saw the change in both of them. What papers? She asked. Matthew's gaze moved toward the house. Anna kept the original Creek agreement. Where? In the office, Martha said before Matthew could answer, unless you moved it. Matthew's jaw tightened. I did not move it. Rose thought of the small office, the ledgers, the wooden box behind them, the letter hidden beneath her quilt. She had entered that room only once in her mind, but already it felt important. Then we should find it, Rose said. Matthew looked at her with a strange expression, as though she had stepped into a place he had not expected her to stand. We, he asked. Rose heard the softness behind the word. She lifted her chin. If Harlan Pike is using my past to weaken your house, then it is already my concern. Matthew did not smile, but something in his face changed. A guarded door opened the width of a candle flame. Martha gave a dry nod. Good. Now that the 2 of you are done bleeding in the yard, go look for the paper before Pike finds another way to trouble you. Rose almost laughed. Almost. Inside the house, the warmth of the kitchen met them, but it did not soften the urgency moving between them. Matthew removed his hat and set it on the peg. Rose noticed he placed it beside her shawl without thinking. A small thing, a shared hook, a sign that her presence had already begun to alter the house in ways neither of them had named. The office sat off the back of the sitting room. It was narrow, lined with shelves, and smelled of dust, ink, old leather, and cedar. Ledgers were stacked by year. Receipts were bound with twine. A map of the creek line hung on the wall, its edges curling from age. Matthew stood in the doorway a moment too long. Rose glanced at him. "You do not come in here often." "No, because of Anna." His hand rested on the doorframe. "Because Daniel used to sit under that desk and steal pencils." Rose looked down. Beneath the desk was a small scratch in the floorboards, half-moon-shaped, as if made by a child dragging a wooden toy back and forth. "I am sorry," she said. Matthew nodded once. He entered the room. They searched in silence at first. Matthew opened drawers and took out bundles of paper. Rose sorted receipts from legal documents, setting each pile carefully on the desk. Her teacher's hands returned to her, steady and ordered. Dates first, names second, signatures third, anything with a county seal placed aside. For an hour, the house held only the sound of paper moving. Then Rose found a ledger with a red cloth spine tucked behind 3 account books. It was not as old as the others, and it had no year marked on the cover. Inside were household lists, seed orders, notes on calf births, and several pages in Anna's handwriting. Rose paused when she saw it. Matthew noticed. "What is it?" "Anna's hand." He came to her side, but did not take the ledger. Rose read quietly, careful not to make the private words feel stolen. July 3. Harlan came again about the creek acres. I told him a grieving house is not an empty one. He smiled as if he had not heard me. Matthew's breath changed. Rose turned the page. July 19. Matthew thinks refusing quietly is enough. It is not. Men like Harlan do not respect quiet. They call it weakness and bring a larger knife next time. Rose looked up. Matthew's face was tight. She saw him clearly, Rose said. She saw most things clearly. There was pride in his voice, and sorrow, and something like shame. Rose turned another page. The next entry was shorter. August 2. I placed the creek agreement in the Blue Bible because men searching for land rarely think to open the word. If anything happens, Matthew must know. The East Room key is still hidden behind Daniel's picture frame. I must move it before he finds it and asks questions. Rose stopped. "The Blue Bible," she whispered. Matthew was already moving. They went to the sitting room. On a small side table near the window lay a large Bible bound in faded blue leather. Rose had noticed it earlier but had not touched it. Matthew lifted it with both hands and opened the front cover. A folded document slid out and landed on the table. For a second, neither of them moved. Then Matthew picked it up and unfolded it. Rose saw the county seal, 2 signatures, a dated agreement, a map drawn in careful lines showing the creek boundary exactly where Matthew said it belonged. Matthew's shoulders sank with relief. "Is it enough?" Rose asked. "It should be." But his voice did not sound certain. Behind them, the front door opened. Martha had stepped inside without knocking, her face dark with new concern. "You found something?" she asked. "The creek agreement," Matthew said. "Good," Martha replied. "Then hide it somewhere safer than a Bible on a table." Rose looked at her. "What happened?" Martha shut the door behind her. "Harlan is at the county office now. Leula Crane sent her nephew riding to tell me. Pike is asking for duplicate records and witness statements." Matthew folded the agreement. "Let him ask." Martha shook her head. "That is not all." Rose felt the air in the room tighten. Martha's eyes moved to her. "He is also asking for records from Abilene," she said, "about the school fire." Rose's hands went cold. Matthew turned toward Rose at once, not with doubt but alarm. Martha continued, If he can make the town believe Matthew married a woman with a dangerous past, he may argue Barrow Creek is under unstable management. It may not win him the land, but it could poison the hearing. Rose could not speak. The schoolhouse fire had followed her across miles, across prayer, across a new name spoken kindly in a ranch yard. Matthew stepped closer to her. "This is not yours to carry alone," he said. Rose looked at him, and for the first time since arriving, she wanted badly to believe him. Then a hard knock struck the front door. Once, twice, 3 times. Not a neighbor's knock. Not a friendly one. Matthew moved to answer it, but Rose touched his sleeve. "Wait." Her hand stayed there only a second, but it was enough for both of them to feel it. Matthew opened the door. A young deputy from Caldwell Springs stood on the porch, hat in hand, eyes moving nervously past Matthew to Rose. "Mr. Boone," he said. "Mrs. Boone, I am sorry to trouble you." Matthew's voice was flat. "Then do not." The deputy swallowed. "I have been sent with notice. Mrs. Boone is requested to appear before the county committee tomorrow morning regarding questions of character and prior conduct." Rose felt the room tilt. Matthew reached for the paper, but the deputy did not release it right away. "There is more," he said quietly. His gaze dropped. "Mr. Pike has submitted a sworn statement claiming Mrs. Boone's past may place Barrow Creek's legal standing in question." The deputy let go of the paper. Matthew held it. Rose stared at the seal at the bottom. The room she had been given, the house she had barely begun to trust, and the man who had said he believed her were all being dragged toward town because of a lie dressed in official ink. And tomorrow, Rose Merritt would have to face Caldwell Springs before it decided whether she was a wife, a burden, or a scandal. Rose had faced judgment before, but never with a man standing beside her, as if her shame were something he meant to share. The next morning, the sky over Barrow Creek Ranch was pale and hard, the kind of winter sky that looked washed clean of mercy. Frost silvered the porch rails. The water trough wore a thin skin of ice. Horses breathed white clouds into the cold as Matthew hitched the wagon before sunrise. Rose watched from the kitchen window with her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she had not tasted. On the table behind her lay the county notice. "Mrs. Rose Boone is requested to appear before the Caldwell Springs County Committee regarding questions of character, prior conduct, and possible bearing upon the Barrow Creek boundary petition." Questions of character, prior conduct. The words sounded so polished, so official, so much cleaner than what they truly meant. They meant Harlan Pike had found the wound in her past and pressed his thumb into it. Rose wore her gray dress because it was the best she had. She brushed it twice, though it did not need brushing. She pinned her hair tighter than usual, then loosened it because she did not want to look severe. Then she hated herself for caring how people who had already judged her might prefer her to appear. Matthew came in from the yard and paused at the threshold. His coat was buttoned high. His hat was in his hand. He looked at her in that steady, careful way of his, but this morning there was something else behind it. Not pity, not worry alone. Resolve. "You do not have to go in there alone," he said. Rose set down her cup. "They summon me, not you. They can summon paper. They cannot tell me where to stand." The words were plain, but they entered her heart like warmth through a cracked wall. Martha Keene arrived a few minutes later, carrying a covered basket and wearing a black bonnet that made her look prepared for war disguised as church. "I brought bread," she said. "People speak more boldly when they are hungry. We will not give them that advantage." Rose almost smiled. "I do not think bread will stop Harlan Pike." "No," Martha said, "but it may stop me from saying what I should not in a public room." Matthew took the blue Bible from the side table and removed the Creek agreement, placing it inside a leather folder. Rose saw how carefully he handled it, not only as proof of land, but as Anna's last act of protection. Beside it, he placed the red-spined ledger. Rose's eyes followed the movement. Matthew noticed, Anna's words may matter. Rose looked toward the sitting room mantel, where the photograph of Anna and little Daniel stood in morning light. Would she want them read in public? She asked. Matthew's hand stilled on the folder. The question had cost her to ask. She knew what it meant to have private pain carried into a room of curious faces. She would not do it to another woman, not even a woman whose place in this house had made Rose feel small. Matthew looked at the ledger for a long moment. No, he said at last, not unless there is no other way. Rose nodded. Outside, the wagon waited. The ride to Caldwell Springs took nearly an hour. The road followed the creek for a while, then climbed into open country where the wind had room to gather force. Rose sat beside Matthew on the wagon seat with Martha in the back holding the basket and muttering at every rut like it had offended her personally. Matthew did not ask if Rose was afraid. She was grateful. Afraid was too small a word for what moved inside her. She looked at the land as they passed, brown grass bending under frost, fence posts leaning in a long, tired line, a hawk circling above the ridge. It was beautiful country, but it had the hard beauty of a place that did not care whether a person survived it. Caldwell Springs appeared slowly, first as a church steeple, then a row of wooden roofs, then the main street with its mercantile, blacksmith, hotel, and county hall. By the time the wagon rolled into town, people had already begun to look. A woman sweeping the boardwalk stopped mid-stroke. Two men outside the feed store lowered their voices. A boy ran ahead toward the county hall, likely to announce that the new Mrs. Boone had arrived. Rose kept her eyes forward. Matthew reined the horses near the hall and climbed down. Before she could gather her skirt, he was beside the wagon, offering his hand. She stared at it for half a second. In Abilene, during the worst of the whispers, no one had offered a hand in public. Help given privately could be denied later. Help given where others saw it meant choosing a side. Rose placed her hand in his. Matthew helped her down and did not release her immediately. That small delay said more than a speech. Martha climbed from the back on her own, refusing assistance with a look that would have frightened softer men. Inside the county hall, the air smelled of coal smoke, damp wool, and ink. The committee sat at the front behind a long table, 3 men and 1 woman. Rose recognized none of them. Harlan Pike stood near the wall in a dark coat, his gray hat tucked under his arm, smiling as though the morning had been arranged for his comfort. Beside him stood a thin woman with sharp eyes and a tight mouth. Matthew leaned slightly toward Rose. Luella Crane, schoolteacher here. Rose remembered Martha's warning. Old sorrow made into fresh scandal. The room was half full. Ranchers, shopkeepers, curious wives, men who had business elsewhere but had found reason to linger. A few turned away when Rose looked at them, which was worse than open staring. The chairman, Mr. Whitcomb, cleared his throat. "Mrs. Boone," he said, "thank you for appearing." Rose stepped forward. "I was told I was required to." A small sound moved through the room. Matthew's eyes flicked to her with something like approval. Mr. Whitcomb adjusted his spectacles. "This is not a trial." "No," Rose said. "Trials have clearer rules." Martha coughed into her glove. It might have been a laugh. Harlan's smile thinned. The woman on the committee leaned forward. She had kind eyes but a tired face. "Mrs. Boone, the committee has received a petition from Mr. Pike regarding the Barrow Creek boundary. Attached to that petition are concerns about the reliability of certain household records and statements. given recent changes at the Boone property. Rose glanced toward Harlan. Recent changes meaning me. The woman hesitated. Yes. Matthew stepped forward. My wife's character has no bearing on a creek line settled years before she came here. Harlan spoke before the committee could answer. With respect, Mr. Boone, if your household records are now being handled by a woman dismissed under questionable circumstances from a teaching post, the committee has reason to ask whether documents recently produced from your home can be trusted. There it was. Not shouted. Not crude. A lie in a pressed coat. Rose felt every eye turn toward her. Matthew's hand tightened on the leather folder, but Rose touched his sleeve before he could speak. This time, she would not let someone else hold her truth for her. She stepped forward. I was not dismissed for burning a schoolhouse, she said. The room went still. Harlan's expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened. Rose drew a breath. I was the teacher at the Abilene Crossroads School. In March, a boy brought lamp oil into the storage room and started a fire while trying to frighten another student. I got every child out. I went back inside for the attendance book because it held the names of children whose families had fought to have that school built. That was foolish, maybe, but it was not criminal. It was not careless. And no child was harmed. Luella Crane folded her hands, yet the school was closed. Yes, Rose said, because rebuilding cost money the board did not wish to spend. Blaming me cost them nothing. A murmur moved across the benches. Rose could feel her hands trembling, so she clasped them together. The boy's father blamed me to protect his son. The board blamed me to protect their purse. The town accepted both because a woman alone is often easier to doubt than a man with standing. The words came stronger now. I came here because I had lost work, not honor. Silence followed. For the first time since entering the hall, Rose could hear the stove crackle in the corner. Matthew stood just behind her, not speaking over her, not rescuing her from her own voice. Just there. The woman on the committee looked down at the papers before her. Do you have any witness to this account? Rose's heart sank. Harlan's smile began to return. Then the back door of the county hall opened. A young man stepped inside, hat in hand, his cheeks red from riding hard in cold air. Rose turned, and for a moment she did not recognize him. Then she saw the scar near his chin. Tommy Bell, she whispered. The young man swallowed, suddenly looking more like the 14-year-old boy who used to sit in the back row pretending not to care about spelling. Yes, ma'am, he said, it is me. Rose's breath caught. Tommy walked forward, holding a folded paper. I was in that schoolhouse, he said to the committee. My little sister, too. Miss Merritt carried her out when smoke filled the front room. I saw it. My father signed this statement before I left Abilene. So did Reverend Cole and Mrs. Hanley from the school board. He placed the paper on the table. How did you know? Rose asked softly. Tommy looked past her toward Martha. Martha lifted one shoulder. I sent a wire yesterday. Rose stared at her. Martha's mouth tightened. Bread was not my only contribution. A strange sound moved through Rose, almost a laugh, almost a sob. The committee woman opened the statement and read. Her expression changed. Mr. Whitcomb read over her shoulder. The two men beside him leaned in. Harlan Pike stopped smiling. Matthew moved close enough for only Rose to hear him. You should have had this years ago. Rose's eyes burned. No one asked for it years ago. His face filled with quiet pain. The chairman cleared his throat. This statement strongly supports Mrs. Boone's account. Harlan stepped forward. One statement does not settle the land matter. No, Matthew said, voice low, but it settles the lie you brought with it. A murmur rose again, louder this time. Harlan looked around the room, measuring the shift. He recovered quickly, as men like him often do. "Then let us speak of documents," he said. "Mr. Boone claims an old Creek agreement exists. We have yet to know whether it is original, altered, or conveniently found after my petition." Matthew opened the leather folder and removed the county agreement. Before he could hand it forward, Rose noticed something. A small tear at the bottom edge. Not new, not important by itself, but she had seen that shape before. In Anna's ledger. The map entry had mentioned the East Room key, hidden behind Daniel's picture frame. Rose looked toward Matthew. "The agreement may not be the only proof," she said. He turned to her. "What do you mean?" Rose lowered her voice. "Anna wrote about a key behind Daniel's picture frame. I thought it was only for the room, but what if it is for something else?" Matthew's face changed. Martha heard enough to lean closer. "What key?" Matthew did not answer at first. Then he looked toward the committee, toward Harlan, toward the legal paper in his hand. "The hearing must wait," he said. Harlan laughed once. "How convenient." Matthew's eyes did not leave Rose. "No," he said, "not convenient, necessary." Rose felt the room watching them, but all she could think of was the little boy in the photograph, his gap-toothed smile, his small hand around a fishing pole. A key hidden behind his picture. A dead woman's ledger. A creek line worth stealing. And a secret in Barrow Creek Ranch that Anna Boone had left behind for the day Harlan Pike finally came too close. The ride back to Barrow Creek Ranch felt longer than the ride into town. Rose sat beside Matthew on the wagon seat with her gloved hands folded tight in her lap. The wind pushed against her bonnet and tugged loose a few strands of hair, but she barely noticed. Her mind had stayed in the county hall, circling the same few things over and over. Tommy Bell walking through the door. Martha's wire. Harlan Pike's smile fading. And Anna Boone's strange note in the red ledger. The East Room key is still hidden behind Daniel's picture frame. The words had not meant much the first time Rose read them. A key to a room, a private sorrow, a mother hiding something because grief made even small objects painful to touch. Now, every mile back to the ranch made the words feel heavier. Matthew had been silent since they left Caldwell Springs. Not angry, not distant in the old way. This silence had a different shape. It was the silence of a man walking through his own memories with a lantern in his hand, afraid of what the light might find. Martha rode behind them on her gray mare, keeping pace with the wagon. She had refused to ride in the back after the hearing. "I may be old," she had said, "but I am not cargo." So the three of them crossed the frost-browned country beneath a hard white sky, carrying proof, fear, and unfinished truth. At last, the cottonwood beside the Boone house came into view. The horses slowed as if they too understood the place was no longer only a home. It was a box of buried things waiting to be opened. Matthew stopped the wagon near the porch and climbed down first. He came around to help Rose, then paused before offering his hand, as if still learning whether help was welcome or assumed. Rose placed her hand in his. This time, when her boots touched the ground, she did not let go immediately. Matthew looked down at their joined hands. Something in his face softened, then tightened with pain. "Daniel's picture is on the mantel," he said. "I know." His eyes lifted to hers. "I have not moved it in 4 years." Rose felt the weight of that confession. "Then we will be careful," she said. "We." She used the word deliberately. Matthew heard it. She saw that he did. They went inside with Martha following close behind. The house was warm from the banked morning fire, but the sitting room felt cold in a way no stove could fix. Sunlight lay across the floorboards. Dust floated in the bright strips of light. On the mantel, the 3 photographs waited. Matthew and Anna. The house before the porch was widened. Matthew and Daniel by the creek. Rose stood before the boy's photograph. Daniel Boone's smile looked too alive for the quiet room. His hat sat crooked. His fishing pole leaned across his small shoulder. One knee of his trousers had been patched with dark cloth. The sight of that patch almost broke Rose more than the smile did. A mother had mended it. A father had watched him wear it. Then fever had taken him from both. Matthew stood beside her, but not too close. His hand rose once, then dropped, as if touching the frame after so long felt like asking permission from the dead. Martha's voice came gently from behind them. "Take it down, Matthew." He swallowed. For a moment, Rose thought he could not do it. Then he reached forward and lifted the frame from the mantel with both hands. The wall behind it was slightly darker where the photograph had shielded it from years of smoke and sun. Tucked between the back of the frame and the wooden stand was a small envelope, stiff with age. Matthew stared at it. Rose's breath caught. Martha stepped closer. Anna always did trust plain hiding places. Matthew turned the frame over carefully and removed the envelope. On its front, written in the same handwriting as the ledger, were 3 words. For Matthew only. The room changed. Rose took one step back at once. "This is yours," she said. Matthew looked from the envelope to her. Harlan Pike, the county hearing, the creek line, all of it pressed around them. But Rose would not steal another private thing from Anna Boone. She had read the letter in the East Room because fear had driven her hand. She would not do that again. Matthew held the envelope as if it might burn him. "If it concerns the land," Martha said, "then it concerns more than Matthew." Rose shook her head softly. "Let him read it first." Matthew looked at her for a long time, then he nodded. He carried the envelope to the kitchen table because grief sometimes needs a common place to survive it. He sat down, broke the seal, and unfolded a single sheet of paper. Rose stood by the stove, her arms wrapped around herself. Martha remained near the doorway, face stern, eyes kind. Matthew began to read silently. At first nothing changed. Then his jaw trembled. Rose had seen him angry. She had seen him guarded. She had seen him uncertain before the committee, but she had not yet seen Matthew Boone look young. In that moment he did. A man stripped of all the years he had built around the wound. His hand lowered until the paper touched the table. "What is it?" Martha asked. Matthew did not answer. Rose took one step forward. "Matthew." He closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet, though no tears fell. "She knew," he said. Martha's face tightened. "Knew what?" Matthew pushed the letter across the table, but only halfway. His voice came rough. "Read it." Rose hesitated. He looked at her. "Please." So she picked up Anna's letter. The first line struck softly. "Matthew, if you found this, then either Harlan has come again, or you have finally learned to look behind what hurts you." Rose's fingers tightened around the page. She read aloud because Matthew seemed unable to. "I placed the key behind Daniel's picture because I knew you would keep him where you could see him, even if it broke you every morning. Forgive me for using our boy as a hiding place. I could not think of anywhere safer." Rose paused. Matthew's head bowed. She continued. "The key opens the cedar trunk under the loose boards in the East Room. Inside are the original creek survey notes, my father's witness statement, and the receipt proving Harlan Pike was paid for the land he now claims was never properly transferred." Martha let out a sharp breath. "Paid," she said. "That snake." Rose read on. Harlan will not stop because he does not want land only. He wants to erase the day he lost. My father helped draw that line. Harlan signed it. I watched him do it. He smiled then too because he thought signatures were less powerful than fear. Matthew lifted his head slightly. Rose's voice softened as she reached the next lines. If he comes after you when I am gone, do not fight him with silence. You always think being steady is enough. It is not. Speak. Show the papers. Let others stand with you. Let someone love you enough to help. The kitchen went very still. Rose could hardly read the final lines. And if there is ever another woman in this house, do not give her only shelter. Shelter saves the body. Belonging saves the heart. Tell her why you made room. Tell her before she has to wonder whether she is living in a kindness or a grave. Rose stopped. The letter shook in her hand. Those words had found both of them at once. Matthew stood abruptly and turned toward the window, one hand covering his mouth. His shoulders moved once, not quite a sob, not quite a breath. Martha looked away, granting him the dignity of not being watched. Rose set the letter on the table. For several moments, the only sound was the faint crackle of the stove and the restless movement of a horse outside the kitchen window. Then Matthew spoke without turning. I thought I was honoring her by keeping everything as it was. Rose said nothing. I kept the shawl, the chair, Daniel's picture, the room. His voice tightened. I kept so much that I made the house impossible for anyone living. Rose's heart ached at the plainness of it. Matthew turned at last. When I got your letter, I read it 3 times. You wrote like a woman trying not to ask for anything. I knew that kind of tired. I knew what it sounded like. He looked toward the stairs. I had no spare room. Rose already knew somehow, before he said the rest. The east room was mine and Anna's first. After she died, I slept there for 2 nights and then never again. I moved to the back room. Daniel's things were in the small room across the hall. I could not touch that either. His eyes returned to Rose. When I answered your letter, I cleaned the east room. I took out what belonged to grief and left what I thought might belong to peace. I told myself I was only making space because it was decent. He gave a quiet, broken breath. But Anna was right. I should have told you what it meant. Rose could not move. The room he had given her had not been empty. It had been the place he had avoided because it hurt too much. He had entered that pain before she ever arrived, cleared it with his own hands, and called it spare so she would not feel trapped by his sacrifice. Martha's voice was softer than Rose had ever heard it. Where is the key? Matthew looked back at the photograph still lying on the table. The small envelope had held the letter, but not the key. Rose crossed to the mantel. She lifted the wooden stand and ran her fingers along the back. Nothing. She checked the edge of the frame. Nothing. Matthew came beside her and turned the frame over fully. A small slit had been cut into the backing, hidden beneath a strip of dark cloth. He pulled it free, and a brass key dropped into his palm. It was no longer than Rose's thumb. For a moment, all 3 of them stared at it. Then a sound came from outside. Hooves. Vast. Matthew closed his hand around the key and moved to the window. A rider was coming up the road from the east. Not Harlan. The deputy from Caldwell Springs. He reined hard near the porch and hurried down before the horse had fully stopped. Matthew opened the door. The deputy's face was pale from the cold and something worse. Mr. Boone, he said. Mrs. Boone, you need to come back to town. Matthew stepped onto the porch. Why? The deputy looked at Rose, then at Martha, then back at Matthew. Mr. Pike has brought 2 men from Abilene. They claim they knew Mrs. Boone during the school fire. Rose felt the floor drop beneath her. The deputy swallowed. They are saying the witness statement is false, and they are asking the committee to reopen the character matter before the land hearing tomorrow. Matthew's hand tightened around the hidden key. Rose looked toward the stairs, toward the east room, toward whatever Anna had left beneath the floorboards. The truth was in this house. But Harlan Pike had just brought new lies to town. And by morning, one of them would decide whether Rose still had a place at Barrow Creek Ranch. By the time the deputy rode back toward Caldwell Springs, Rose felt as if the whole world had learned how to knock on her door. First, Harlan Pike had come with his polished smile. Then the county had come with its official paper. Now 2 men from Abilene had arrived to speak against her, and Rose knew, without being told, that truth alone would not be enough if lies reached the room first wearing clean coats and steady voices. Matthew stood in the open doorway for a long moment after the deputy left. The small brass key was still closed inside his fist. Wind moved past him into the house, carrying the smell of cold earth and horse sweat. Martha shut the door herself. "Well," she said, "we can either stand here and let Harlan Pike write the next chapter, or we can open that floor." Rose looked toward the staircase. The east room. Her room. Anna's room. The room Matthew had made ready by stepping into the part of the house that hurt him most. Matthew turned from the door. "We open it." His voice held no hesitation now. The 3 of them went upstairs together. Rose's heart beat hard with every step. The hallway seemed narrower than it had before. The blue curtain in her room moved faintly at the window, though she was certain she had latched it that morning. Sunlight lay across the quilt. Her traveling case stood beside the bed. For a strange second, Rose remembered arriving with that same case in her hand, afraid of what the rancher would ask from her. Now she was standing beside him, about to lift boards from the floor to save his land, his name, and maybe her own future. Matthew entered slowly. His eyes moved over the room not as it was now but as it must have been once. Rose saw the memory cross his face. A bed shared with Anna, Daniel's small feet running past the door, fever light, silence after. "I can do this," Martha said. Matthew shook his head. "No, I have avoided enough." Rose moved to the bed and lifted the quilt edge, searching the floor. Anna wrote under the loose boards, "Did you know of any?" Matthew looked around. Near the east window, it creaked no matter how many nails I put in. They went to the window. Rose knelt first, pressing her palm gently along the boards. One plank near the wall gave the faintest movement. "There," she said. Matthew crouched beside her. He took his pocket knife and worked the blade carefully between the boards. The first did not rise easily. Dust had settled into every seam. Old wood resisted being disturbed, but after a few slow minutes the plank lifted with a dry groan. Beneath it was darkness. Rose held the lamp lower. A cedar trunk sat hidden between the floor joists, smaller than she expected, with iron bands darkened by age. Matthew slid his fingers around the handle and lifted it free. A smell rose with it. Cedar, dust, and years. He set it on the bed. No one spoke. The brass key fit the lock. For a moment, Matthew's hand rested on top of the trunk. Rose thought he might stop, not because he feared Harlan, because opening it meant hearing Anna's voice again and knowing she had carried fear alone while he thought silence was strength. Rose laid her hand lightly beside his, not touching him but close enough. "We are here," she said. Matthew looked at her. Then he opened the trunk. Inside were papers wrapped in blue cloth, a small leather pouch, a survey notebook, 3 sealed envelopes, and on top of everything, a child's wooden whistle carved in the shape of a bird. Matthew picked up the whistle first. His face changed so completely that Rose had to look away. "Daniel made that?" she asked softly. Matthew shook his head. I made it for him. He said it sounded more like a dying hinge than a bird. Martha gave a small, broken laugh from the doorway. Matthew held the whistle for one long breath, then set it gently on the bed. Rose unwrapped the blue cloth. The original survey notes were there just as Anna had written. The paper was old but clear, marked with measurements, witness names, and a rough drawing of the creek. There was a statement signed by Anna's father, Josiah Vale, who had served as a survey witness. There was also a receipt with Harlan Pike's own signature, proving payment for the disputed acres. Matthew took the receipt and stared at it. He signed away any claim, Rose said. Yes. Then why would he risk all this? Martha stepped closer. Because men like Harlan do not believe paper matters unless it is in their hand. If he thought this was lost, he thought the truth had died with Anna. Rose opened the leather pouch. Inside was a small silver ring, a broken pencil, and another folded page. Matthew saw the ring and went still. Anna's ring. Rose did not touch it. Instead, she picked up the folded page and read the outside. For the woman in the east room. Her breath caught. Matthew looked at her, but this time he did not tell her to read or stop. He only waited. Rose unfolded the page. The handwriting was Anna S., but weaker than the others. This letter had been written near the end. Rose read silently at first. Then, because the words seemed meant to cross the room, she read aloud. If you are here, then I pray Matthew found the courage to let life enter this house again. If he did not, forgive him. Grief made him gentle in ways people notice, and afraid in ways they do not. Rose paused, her throat tightening. Matthew lowered his eyes. Rose continued. I do not know your name, but I know something of you. A woman does not come to a ranch like this without leaving something behind. Maybe shame that was never hers. Maybe hunger. Maybe a place where she was tolerated but not loved. Maybe only a long road and a heart too tired to hope. The room blurred. Rose pressed the paper flatter with trembling fingers. If he gave you the east room, know this. He did not give you what was left over. He gave you the first place where he ever felt at home. He gave it because something in your letter must have told him you needed more than a roof. You needed a door that closed, a bed that was yours, and time to learn the difference between being kept and being chosen. A tear fell before Rose could stop it. It struck the page near the margin but did not touch the ink. Matthew looked at her then, and everything he could not say stood plain in his face. Rose kept reading. Do not let Harlan Pike turn fear into law. He came to our door when Daniel was ill and asked Matthew to sell, saying grief would be easier away from disputed land. I told him this land was not disputed. It was witnessed, signed, and paid for. He smiled and said widows often remembered what comforted them. That was the day I began hiding proof. Martha's hands closed into fists. The town may admire Harlan because he wears clean collars and gives money to public causes, but his kindness is a fence built facing the wrong way. It is not meant to welcome. It is meant to keep people from seeing what he takes. Rose looked at Matthew. This will help. Matthew nodded, but his eyes had darkened. Rose read the final lines. If you stand in that public room, do not let them make you small. You are not an intruder because another woman loved him first. A house that has known love once is not closed forever. It is waiting to learn a new voice. Rose could not continue for several seconds. Then she whispered the last sentence. Make him say yours out loud. The room went silent. Martha turned to the window, blinking hard. Matthew sat on the edge of the bed, the receipt in one hand and Daniel's whistle beside him. He looked like a man standing in the ruins of all the words he had never spoken. Rose folded the letter with care. She wrote this for someone she never knew, Rose said. Matthew's voice was rough. She knew more than I did. Rose sat beside him, leaving a respectful space between them. She was not asking you to forget her. No, he said. She was asking you not to bury yourself with her. Matthew closed his eyes. For the first time since Rose had met him, he did not fight the tear that slipped down his face. He wiped it away quickly, almost with shame, but Rose had seen it, and she did not look away. There are moments in a story where the heart shifts quietly, not with a kiss or a grand speech, but with one person allowing another to be seen. If you believe healing can begin in a silence like that, stay with Rose and Matthew a little longer, because the hardest truth is still waiting in town. By late afternoon, the trunk had been emptied and the papers placed in careful order. Rose used the teacher's habits still living in her hands. She arranged every document by date: original survey, witness statement, payment receipt, Anna's notes, county copy. She tied each bundle with string and labeled them in clean, clear writing. Matthew watched her work for several minutes before speaking. You did this at the school, did you not? Rose did not look up, kept records, made order out of trouble. Her hands paused. I tried. You did more than try. The words were simple, but they carried weight because he had seen what the town had tried to take from her. Martha returned from the barn after speaking with one of Matthew's hands. Her face was grim. Harlan's 2 men are staying at the Caldwell Hotel, she said. Names are Emmett Shaw and Willis Grady. Do those mean anything to you? Rose felt the blood drain from her face. Matthew saw it at once. Rose. She sat slowly. Willis Grady was the father of the boy who started the fire, she said. Martha muttered something sharp under her breath. Matthew's voice lowered. And Emmett Shaw. Rose stared at the papers on the bed. He was on the school board. The room seemed to close around them. Matthew stood. Then Pike bought the men who blamed you. Maybe he did not have to buy them, Rose said softly. Some men will lie for free if the lie saves their pride. Martha nodded once hard. Then we need someone who can name them. Tommy can, Rose said, but he is young. They will say he remembers wrong. Matthew looked toward the window. Dusk had begun to gather over the fields. Who else knew? Rose closed her eyes, searching memory. Smoke in the schoolhouse. Children coughing. Tommy's little sister crying into her shoulder. The boy with lamp oil. Willis Grady shouting before the ashes were cold. The board meeting 3 weeks later. A woman standing in the back of the room, silent, hands clasped around a black prayer book. Rose opened her eyes. Mrs. Hanley, she said. She was on the school board. She signed Tommy's statement. Martha frowned. Can she be brought here? She is old, but she hated what they did. Rose's voice strengthened. If she knows Grady and Shaw are lying, she may speak. Matthew reached for his hat. Then I ride to the telegraph office. Martha grabbed his sleeve. Not alone. Matthew looked at her. Harlan will be watching the roads, she said. He knows you found something or he suspects it. Let me send my hired boy west with the wire. You stay here and keep those papers breathing. Matthew did not like it, but he heard the sense in it. Rose gathered the documents into the leather folder. We should make copies, she said. Tonight, Martha asked. Yes, if these papers vanish, Harlan wins. Matthew looked at the folder, then at Rose. You think he would come here? Rose thought of the way Harlan looked at the house, at the upstairs window, at her. I think he already believes what hurts us belongs to him. No one argued. Night came early. Martha's hired boy rode out with a message for Abilene and instructions to bring any reply straight to the ranch. Matthew locked the original documents in the iron stove box after the fire burned low. Rose copied Anna's notes by lamplight, her hand cramping but steady. Martha dozed in a chair near the door with a shotgun across her lap, though she had promised not to point it at anyone unless they were foolish enough to enter uninvited. Matthew sat across from Rose at the kitchen table, copying the survey figures. Now and then their eyes met over the papers. Each time, something unspoken passed between them. Not romance yet, not fully. Something stronger than gratitude and quieter than promise. Near midnight, Rose stood to stretch her aching fingers. Outside, the wind moved through the cottonwood branches. Then came a faint sound from the yard. Not the wind. Not a horse. A soft scrape near the side of the house. Matthew lifted his head. Martha's eyes opened at once. Rose blew out the lamp before anyone told her to. In the sudden dark, another sound came. Glass shifting in the office window. Someone was trying to get inside. And on the table between Rose and Matthew lay the copied truth Harlan Pike could not afford to let reach morning. For one breath, no one moved. The kitchen was dark except for a thin strip of moonlight lying across the floorboards. Rose stood beside the table with ink on her fingers and fear pressing cold against the back of her neck. Matthew was halfway out of his chair, one hand already reaching for the leather folder. Martha sat near the door, suddenly wide awake, her face sharp as a blade in the dimness. Another soft scrape came from the office window. Then a whisper. Rose could not make out the words, but she heard two voices. Matthew moved first. Quietly, he gathered the copied papers and pushed them into Rose's hands. "Take these upstairs," he whispered. "No." His eyes found hers in the dark. Rose heard how childish the refusal sounded, but she could not stop it. She had spent too long being sent away from rooms where her fate was being decided. Matthew leaned closer, his voice low but firm. "Not because you are weak, because you are the only one who can keep them safe if they get past us." That changed the shape of the command. Rose clutched the papers to her chest. Martha rose without a sound. "Go, girl." Rose hesitated only 1 second longer. Then she moved toward the stairs, placing each foot carefully so the boards would not cry out beneath her. Halfway up, she looked back. Matthew had taken the iron stove poker in one hand. Martha held the shotgun low, pointed toward the floor, her finger nowhere near the trigger but her meaning very plain. The office window gave a small cracking sound. Rose hurried up the remaining stairs. In the east room, the blue curtain moved in the night air. Her lamp was still out. She crossed to the bed, slid the copied documents beneath the mattress, then stopped. Too obvious. If Harlan Pike had sent men into this house, they would know to look in drawers, trunks, under beds, behind books. Men who came for papers did not search like honest people. They searched like thieves who believed the whole world thought as they did. Rose looked around the room. The cedar trunk sat open near the wall. The loose floorboards had been placed back but not nailed. Her traveling case stood near the chair. Anna's letter lay in the small drawer. Then Rose's eyes went to the window. The blue curtain. She crossed the room, took the packet of copied papers and slid them into the narrow cloth sleeve at the top where the curtain rod passed through. The fabric held them flat and hidden, a woman's hiding place, not under lock, not in iron, in something ordinary enough to be ignored. Downstairs, a man grunted. A chair scraped hard. Rose froze. Then Matthew's voice rang through the house. "That is far enough." A stranger answered, "We do not want trouble, Boone." Martha's voice cut in, "Then you should have stayed outside." Rose moved to the hall and crouched near the top of the stairs. From there she could see part of the sitting room through the railing. 2 men stood just inside the office doorway. One was tall and narrow, with a drooping mustache. The other was shorter, thick-necked, and breathing hard as if climbing through the window had cost him more than he expected. Neither man was Harlan Pike. Matthew stood between them and the kitchen table. Martha stood near the front door, shotgun steady in both hands. The tall man lifted his palms. Mr. Pike said the papers belonged to the county. Matthew did not blink. Then the county can knock in daylight. The shorter man sneered. A man has a right to protect legal evidence. He sent you to steal it. He sent us to collect what you hid. Rose felt anger rise through her fear. That was how men like Harlan survived. They changed the name of a thing until theft became collection, lies became concern, cruelty became business. Matthew took one step forward. Leave. The tall man's eyes flicked toward the stairs. Rose drew back quickly, but not before he saw movement. There is someone up there, he said. Matthew's grip tightened on the poker. The shorter man smiled. New wife hiding with the documents, maybe. Martha cocked the shotgun. The sound filled the room. You take one step toward those stairs, she said, and I will make sure your grandchildren hear the story of how a grandmother frightened you clean out of your boots. The shorter man's smile vanished. Matthew kept his voice even. You tell Pike this. Tomorrow morning I will bring the original agreement, the receipt he signed, Anna's notes, and every witness who still remembers the truth. If he wants to face that in public, he is welcome. The tall man shifted. You have the receipt. Matthew did not answer. But silence answered enough. The two men looked at each other. For the first time, Rose saw uncertainty break through their boldness. Then from outside, a horse snorted. Not one of Matthew's. Rose had heard the Barrow Creek horses often enough now to know their restless sounds. This was closer to the side yard. Another man was outside. Matthew heard it too. His eyes moved only slightly, but Martha noticed. The shorter man lunged toward the table. Everything happened at once. Matthew caught him by the coat and drove him back into the wall hard enough to knock a framed picture crooked. The tall man tried to bolt for the office window, but Martha swung the shotgun around and blocked him before he could pass. Rose stood. The copied papers were hidden, but the original documents were still downstairs. Matthew had locked them in the stove box after the fire burned low. If someone outside knew that, this whole fight was only a distraction. She ran back into the east room, pulled on her boots, and climbed through the window onto the porch roof. The cold struck her like water. She flattened herself against the shingles and moved toward the edge where the porch roof dipped near the cottonwood branches. Below, a shadow moved beside the kitchen wall. A man was kneeling near the wood box, working at the small outside hatch that led toward the stove flue cleanout. Rose's heart hammered. Harlan had guessed wrong, but close enough. The man was trying to find a way into the stove box from behind. Rose searched for something, anything. Her hand closed around a loose piece of broken shingle. She threw it toward the barn. It struck a bucket with a sharp clang. The kneeling man jerked up and turned. At the same moment, Matthew's dog, Buck, began barking from the barn. Rose had forgotten the dog was shut in there. The man cursed and ran for his horse. Rose leaned over the edge of the porch roof and shouted with every bit of strength in her. Matthew's side yard. Inside, boots thundered. The front door flew open. Matthew came out first, followed by Martha still holding the shotgun, and the two intruders stumbling ahead of them with their hands raised. The man from the side yard had already mounted, but Buck burst from the barn where one of the horses had kicked loose the latch. The dog charged, barking fiercely at the rider's heels. The horse reared, tossing the man sideways into the dirt. Matthew reached him before he could rise. The man looked up, and even in the dim light, Rose saw his face. Harlan Pike. For a moment, the whole yard held still. Harlan's hat had fallen off. Dirt streaked one side of his fine coat. The smile he wore in daylight was gone, and without it he looked smaller, meaner, and older. Matthew stood over him, breathing hard. Rose climbed down from the porch roof with Martha's help. Her hands shook, and her skirt had torn at the hem, but she barely felt it. Harlan looked at her with pure hatred. "You should have stayed in Abilene," he said. Rose stepped forward until she stood beside Matthew. "I tried hiding there," she said. "It did not make liars kinder." The words struck the yard harder than she expected. Matthew glanced at her, and for one brief second, even with danger around them, his eyes softened. Martha had sent one of the ranch hands to fetch the deputy. By dawn, Harlan Pike and the two men he had brought were sitting under guard in the Barrow Creek barn, cold, angry, and much less proud than they had been the night before. No one slept after that. Rose changed into her gray dress again, though her hands moved slowly from weariness. She repaired the torn hem with quick stitches while sitting near the kitchen stove. Matthew stood at the window, watching the barn. Martha brewed coffee strong enough to wake the dead and insulted every man involved at least twice. Just after sunrise, Martha's hired boy returned from the telegraph office with mud on his horse and a paper in his hand. Rose stood so quickly her chair scraped backward. The reply was from Abilene. Mrs. Hanley was coming. Not only that, she was bringing the original school board minutes from the meeting after the fire. Rose read the message twice, then pressed it to her chest. Matthew came to her side. "She is coming," Rose whispered. "I see that." "No," Rose said, looking up at him. "You do not understand. Someone is coming because the truth matters to them." Matthew's voice grew quiet. "I understand more than I did." The county hearing resumed at 10 that morning. By then, Caldwell Springs already knew Harlan Pike had been found in the side yard of Barrow Creek Ranch after midnight. Rumor, for once, worked in truth's favor. People filled the county hall until the walls seemed to lean inward. Harlan stood at the front with dirt still under one fingernail, though he had cleaned himself as well as he could. His eyes avoided Matthew's. The two men from Abilene sat nearby, stiff and pale. Rose sat beside Matthew. Martha sat on her other side. Tommy Bell stood near the back with his hat in his hands. And just before the chairman called the room to order, an old woman in black entered with a leather satchel held against her side. Rose rose before she knew she meant to. "Mrs. Hanley." The old woman looked at her with tired eyes full of fire. "Miss Merritt," she said, "I should have spoken louder years ago. I have come to do it now." Rose could not answer. The hearing began. This time, Harlan Pike did not lead the room. The chairman read the report of the midnight trespass first. Harlan tried to call it a misunderstanding. Martha called it by another name from her seat, and the chairman warned her once, though not very strongly. Then Matthew presented the creek agreement, the receipt, the original survey notes, and Anna's letters where they spoke of the land. He did not read the private lines, only the proof, only what Anna had hidden to defend what was right. When Harlan claimed the receipt had been forged, the county clerk leaned forward and said the signature matched 3 prior filings. The room murmured. Then Mrs. Hanley opened her satchel. She placed the school board minutes on the table. She named Willis Grady's son as the boy who brought the lamp oil. She named Emmett Shaw as the board member who argued closing the school would be cheaper than rebuilding. She named Rose Merritt as the teacher who saved every child. Willis Grady shouted that she was old and confused. Mrs. Hanley turned on him. "I am old," she said, "but I am not confused. You let that woman carry your son's shame because you loved your pride more than truth." The hall went silent. Rose felt the words move through the room like a church bell. Emmett Shaw stared at the floor. Then Tommy Bell stepped forward. "My sister is alive because of Miss Merritt," he said. "I was there. I will say it as many times as needed." No one spoke against him. By noon, the committee dismissed Harlan Pike's boundary petition. The creek line stood as recorded. The signed receipt was entered again into county record. Harlan was fined for filing a false claim and referred to the sheriff for the trespass. Willis Grady and Emmett Shaw left the hall without meeting Rose's eyes. It was over. At least the public part of it. Outside the county hall, people who had stared coldly the day before now looked at Rose with awkward respect. Some nodded. One woman whispered an apology and then hurried away before Rose could respond. Rose did not need all of Caldwell Springs to love her. She only needed the lie to stop breathing. Matthew walked beside her to the wagon. He carried the leather folder under one arm, but his other hand hung at his side, close to hers. "Not touching." "Almost." Rose looked at him. "You did not read Anna's private words." "No." "You could have. They would have moved the room." Matthew shook his head. "She gave me proof, not permission to make a spectacle of her heart." Rose felt something deep inside her settle. For the first time, Anna did not feel like a ghost standing between them. She felt like a woman who had opened a door. The ride home was quiet but different from the silence before. Martha dozed in the back of the wagon, claiming she was only resting her eyes while still somehow correcting Matthew's driving twice. Rose watched the road unwind before them, the hills, the creek, the fence line that had nearly been stolen. When Barrow Creek Ranch appeared, the late sun touched the house with gold. The east room window flashed with light. Rose looked at it and thought of the papers hidden in the blue curtain, still waiting upstairs. Matthew stopped the wagon near the porch. Neither of them climbed down. For a moment they sat side by side, listening to the horses breathe. Then Matthew said, "Rose." Her name and his voice felt different now. She turned toward him. His hands rested on the reins. He looked at them as if they might tell him what to do, then slowly set them down. "I made room for you," he said, "but I did not know how to ask you to belong in it." Rose's heart began to beat harder. Matthew looked at her then, steady and afraid. "I am asking now." The world narrowed to the wagon seat, the cold air, the fading light, and the man who had finally found the courage to speak before it was too late. Rose wanted to answer. But before she could, Martha's voice came from the back of the wagon. "For heaven's sake, Matthew Boone, if that is your proposal, even a fence post could do better." Rose startled. Matthew closed his eyes. And for the first time since Rose had arrived at Barrow Creek Ranch, she laughed. Not politely. Not carefully. She laughed until tears came, and Matthew, after one helpless second, laughed too. But when the laughter faded, his question still stood between them. Not as a demand. As a door. And Rose knew that Part 10 would begin with the answer that would decide whether the East Room remained only a shelter or became the first true home she had ever chosen. Rose did not answer Matthew Boone right away. She sat beside him on the wagon seat while the last gold of evening touched the roof of Barrow Creek Ranch, and for once she did not feel rushed by silence. The horses stood quiet in their traces. The cottonwood branches moved slowly in the wind. Behind them, Martha Keene climbed down from the wagon with great effort and even greater dignity, then carried her basket toward the porch as if she had not just ruined one of the most tender moments of Rose's life. Matthew watched Rose with his hat in his hands. That was how she knew he was truly afraid. Not afraid of Harlan Pike. Not afraid of county papers or public rooms or thieves in the night. Afraid of asking for something his heart could not bear to lose. Rose looked toward the upstairs window. The East Room curtain lifted faintly inside the glass. Hidden in that curtain were the copies she had made by lamplight, proof that truth sometimes survived because a woman's hands refused to shake. Beneath the floorboards had been Anna's trunk. On the mantel stood Daniel's picture. In the kitchen waited a third chair, a blue shawl, and all the memories Rose had once feared would leave no room for her. But now she understood. A house did not become full because grief lived in it. A house became full when no one was allowed to move the grief aside and place hope beside it. Matthew had not asked her to replace Anna. He had asked her to belong. Rose turned back to him. "You gave me a room," she said softly. Matthew swallowed. "I did. At first, I thought that meant you were keeping me separate." His eyes lowered. "Then I thought it meant you were keeping Anna close." "I was," he admitted, "too close maybe." Rose shook her head. "No, not too close, just alone." The word struck him. She saw it in his face. She placed one hand over the rough back of his, where it rested on his knee. "I do not want to live in a house where love has to be hidden so new love can enter," she said. "Anna was here. Daniel was here. Their names can stay." Matthew looked at her then, and the fear in him changed. Rose took a breath. "But I cannot be only the woman you protected. I cannot be only the woman you sheltered. I have been tolerated. I have been pitied. I have been useful. I do not want to spend another winter trying to guess whether I am wanted." "You are," Matthew said. The words came fast, rough, almost broken. Then he stopped, as if startled by his own voice. Rose held still. Matthew turned toward her fully. "You are wanted, Rose, not because you fixed my papers, not because you helped save the land, not because you are steady in trouble, though you are. I want you here when the house is quiet. I want you at the table when morning comes. I want to hear you move upstairs and know the room is not empty. I want your books beside mine. I want your hand on the gate latch, and your shawl by my hat, and your voice in this house." His voice faltered. He looked down, fighting for the rest. "I do not know how to say things finely." Rose's eyes filled. "Then say them plainly." Matthew looked back at her. Plainly was something he understood. "I love you," he said. "I think I began before I knew I had begun, and I am sorry I made you wonder." Rose closed her eyes for one moment. The words did not come like thunder. They came like a lamp lit in a room after a long, cold day. Quiet, steady, enough to see by. When she opened her eyes, Matthew was still waiting. Rose smiled through the tears she no longer tried to hide. "Then yes," she whispered. Matthew went very still. "Yes. Yes, Matthew Boone, I will stay. Not because I have nowhere else to go, because I choose this house. I choose this land. And if you will have me honestly, I choose you." For a second, he looked like a man who had been handed back something he thought life had buried forever. Then he covered her hand with both of his and bowed his head over it. He did not kiss her there in the wagon. He did not make the moment large for the yard or the sky or Martha pretending not to watch from the porch. He simply held her hand like a vow. And Rose knew that, for Matthew, it was one. That evening, they ate in the kitchen with Martha at the table and Buck sleeping near the stove as if he had personally defended the entire county. The blue shawl still hung on the third chair, but Rose no longer felt wounded by it. After supper, she lifted it gently, folded it, and placed it in a cedar chest in the sitting room. Matthew watched from the doorway. "You do not have to move it," he said. "I know," Rose answered, "but chairs are for the living." He nodded slowly. Together, they placed Daniel's wooden whistle on the mantel beside his picture, not hidden, not buried in a trunk. Matthew held it for a long moment before setting it down. "He would have liked you," he said. Rose touched the edge of the frame. "I think I would have liked him too." Matthew's face tightened with grief, but this time he did not turn away from it. The next days changed Barrow Creek Ranch in small ways first. Rose removed the copied papers from the curtain and filed them properly, with one set locked in the county office and another kept in a place only she and Matthew knew. The original Creek agreement was recorded again, clear and final. Harlan Pike's hold on Caldwell Springs weakened faster than anyone expected. Men who had once admired his clean collars now spoke of midnight windows and false petitions. Willis Grady returned to Abilene with his head low. Emmett Shaw wrote one apology that said too little and arrived too late, but Rose kept it anyway, not for forgiveness, but as proof that silence had finally changed sides. Mrs. Hanley stayed 3 nights with Martha Keene before returning home. On her last morning, she took Rose's hands in hers and cried openly. "I should have stood sooner," the old woman said. Rose squeezed her fingers. "You stood when you could." "No," Mrs. Hanley said. "I stood when I became ashamed enough. There is a difference." Rose did not argue. Some truths needed room to breathe. Tommy Bell came by the ranch before leaving town. He stood awkwardly on the porch, turning his hat in his hands, now tall enough to look Rose in the eye. "My sister wanted me to tell you she still reads," he said, "because of you." Rose felt that sentence go deeper than any apology. "She always had a brave mind," Rose said. Tommy smiled. "She says you told her that." When he rode away, Rose stood on the porch until he vanished down the road. Matthew came beside her but did not speak. He did not need to. His shoulder brushed hers once gently, and that was enough. Winter came hard 3 weeks later. Snow covered the ridge. Ice formed along the creek banks. The cattle moved slow and heavy through the cold fields, but Barrow Creek Ranch did not feel empty anymore. In the mornings, Rose made coffee while Matthew brought in wood. Sometimes they spoke. Sometimes they did not. The silence no longer felt like a closed door. It felt like 2 people sharing the same peace. At night, Matthew read from his book while Rose mended near the stove. Her mother's thimble flashed silver on her finger. His hat hung beside her shawl. The 3rd porch step still creaked, and he promised to fix it but never quite did. Rose secretly hoped he never would. Some sounds became part of belonging. One evening, after snow had fallen all day, and the whole world beyond the windows lay blue and white, Matthew came in from the barn carrying a small wooden sign. Rose looked up from her sewing. "What is that?" He set it on the table. The paint was fresh but simple. "Barrow Creek School." Rose stared at it. Matthew rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly shy. "There are children along the creek who cannot make the ride to Caldwell when snow comes. Martha says her niece has 3. The Millers have 2. Tommy said his sister might send books." Rose touched the edge of the sign. Her throat tightened. "I thought," Matthew said, "if you wanted, the front room could hold 6 desks, maybe 8, only through winter at first." Rose looked at him. He had not given her a jewel. He had not brought flowers. He had brought her back the part of herself the world had tried to burn down. "Matthew," she whispered. He misunderstood the tears in her eyes and rushed to speak. "You do not have to. I only thought since you loved teaching, and since the house has room, and since chairs are for the living as you said." Rose stood and crossed to him. This time she kissed his cheek. Matthew went completely still. Then slowly, carefully, as if holding a fragile thing, he put his arms around her. Outside, snow tapped softly against the window. Inside, the house learned a new kind of quiet. By spring, the front room held 7 desks, a slate board, 2 shelves of books, and a jar of sharpened pencils. Children came with red cheeks and muddy boots, hanging their coats where sorrow once hung untouched. Rose stood at the front of the room on the first morning with Matthew watching from the doorway. She wrote her name on the board. Mrs. Rose Boone. For a moment she could not turn around. Not because she was ashamed. Because the name looked like a life she had chosen. Matthew understood. He always understood more now that he had learned to ask fewer questions and speak the ones that mattered. That afternoon, after the children left, Rose found a folded paper on her desk. Matthew's handwriting was careful and uneven. For the woman who made this house a home. Inside was one line. The room was never spare, it was waiting for you. Rose pressed the note to her heart and looked through the window toward the ridge, where the last snow was melting into silver lines along the creek. The land was safe. The lie was finished. Anna and Daniel were remembered. And Rose, who had arrived with one traveling case and a heart trained not to hope, stood in a house full of voices, light, and second chances. She had come to Barrow Creek Ranch needing shelter. But in the end, she found something far greater. A door that opened. A man who finally spoke. And a home that made room for every broken part of her, until nothing in her felt homeless anymore. If Rose and Matthew's story touched your heart, subscribe for more emotional Wild West stories where love heals quietly, truth rises slowly, and even the loneliest frontier hearts can find their way home.